Okay, chaps, got a question for you. What's the worst job you've ever had?
My first job, had to do it in college. I worked at a Pathmark. I started out in the butcher shop, then I went into the deli, and it was really hard, annoying work for pennies on the just a pittance, just no money at all, being abused by just absolute assholes all day long. It was just torture. And the second I was able to get a job that wasn't that paid me better, I was gone. I didn't even give them 2 weeks. I just said I quit. Bye. And yeah, I wouldn't wish that job on my worst enemies.
I had this idea. I was a freelance writer. I still have such aspirations, but I had this idea that I guess we were all kind of raised with in the 90s, this very Horatio Alger idea of working your way up from the mailroom. So I took a job at a newspaper, at a local, fairly large newspaper, because the thing that they had promoted so heavily was the idea of upward mobility. So I took a job being a collator. And what a collator is you are in this large, essentially factory setting, and the newspapers are all going through real quick on a conveyor belt, and you are simply loading stacks of advertisements into a machine, and then they go through one by one and get sorted into the various papers. And that's it. There's no real direct interaction with your labor. It's not even like you're opening the papers and putting them in. All you're doing for hours on end is picking up stacks of advertisements and then loading them into a machine and letting the machine do the work. It was the most dehumanizing experience in a way. I think I had worked service industry jobs and blue collar jobs before, but I had never really felt so despondent. There was nothing to do. There was nothing to even occupy my mind, just going through the motions for hours on end. And because it was a factory situation that had, you experienced both sides of it. You experienced the sort of exploitation of labor or the mindlessness of labor, dehumanization, alienation, but also stagnation due to union efforts. At that point, they had a labor union that was basically just allowing, all that really had to offer was, hey, we'll give you a 15-minute break to go along with your 10-minute break. But it kept so many people working there who had no interest in the job and were surly and unpleasant. Yeah, it was such an experience, and it's one of those things that gives you the illusion of upward mobility, but there, in 2 years, there was never any way to move up. The jobs that the higher up jobs that you wanted always went to the rich kids who had internships anyway. So I guess I kind of got a real taste in that, and a taste that I think everyone should have to a degree, of just how expendable and disposable one can feel as a cog in a machine. So that's probably the worst job I ever had, and I hope ties into our conversation.
I mean, my job was so bad, I'd get so angry at the end of a shift. One time I almost got into a fist fight with another driver on the highway because I was just like, fuck it. You want to start with me right now? I'll show you who you're starting with. I don't give a fuck. I hate my life.
Now, Tom, full disclosure, you also do that if a game of Madden doesn't go your way, so...
All caught up in the daily grind? Join us for 1936's Modern Times here on You're Missing Out with special guest Riley Soloner.
I am really excited for this one, guys. I am so happy. You know him as an actor and comedian from The Chris Gethard Show. Chris Gethard presents Klon, and now you can see him every Saturday morning on Planet Scum Live doing his show Googy Morning. Riley Soloner has joined us today to talk about Modern Times. Riley, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Hello. All right. Yeah.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
A little bit about why I invited you on for this particular film. I am a huge fan of your work. I loved especially Klon, which is a show you did, for folks who don't know, on Chris Gethard Presents, the public access show. It was a trilogy of episodes where you played a robot, in a robot that sort of gains sentience over the course of the trilogy. Is that a fair assessment of that one?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, it is. Classic robot story.
And you and I were talking, I think, last year, and how much I enjoyed it. And you had said, "Oh, do you have any movies that you recommend watching, for future installments?" And I had named a couple, but I didn't even think to name Modern Times because, to me, I remember watching especially that first installment and feeling there was such a commonality there with the way that they both kind of reflect the loss of identity through industrialism and even to the little things where both things end with a character singing a song with no actual lyrics.
Yeah.
That I was like, well, obviously he's, of course that's something, that was a huge influence on this, so I'm not going to bring that up. And then when I reached out to you and I said, hey, I would love to have you on to talk about this film, I was pleasantly surprised to hear you had not seen the film before.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of lazy with my influences, like, I like, Klon is, I mean, I came up with the character after doing a little bit of training with theatrical clowning. And so passion is there. And I feel like I have experience through a lot of the goofy work that I've done over the years, a lot of comedic professional wrestling. I played a referee, so I was always reacting to people's physicality and, trying to make it like a unique fit for what I do. But, like I have like respect, but not a lot of I want to say like specific knowledge about the canon that I respect so much. Like I've read Harpo Marx's autobiography, which is terrific, but I'm not, I can't tell you what my favorite Marx Brothers movie is. Chaplin, of course, is like iconic and genius when it comes to mixing the physical comedy with being able to tell a universal story of the times. But I had never seen modern times before. So yeah. And one thing that as I was watching Modern Times today, and I was trying to think about where Klon and Modern Times overlap, is I kind of felt like Modern Times is the story of someone losing or like holding on to the humanity that they're losing due to industrialization and the Great Depression. And I feel like Klon as a story is almost like a mirror image where you have the product of this fucked up hyper 100 years later industrialization gaining humanity over time.
Well, I want to start the discussion off as we always do, where I'm just going to read what the National Film Registry wrote as their reason for inducting the film, and then we're gonna get into it. And there's a lot of interesting stuff with this. Despite its loose structure, this film, Charlie Chaplin's Last Silent, coherently and comically denounces the industrialization of everyday life. Chaplin achieves a near-perfect balance of humor and pathos, and his scenes with Paulette Goddard, in particular, reflect genuine warmth and maturity. It's interesting to note what they state there, that this was his last, to a degree, silent film. Of course, there's sound in it. It is also the last appearance of the Little Tramp. This would be the last time that character would appear in one of his films. Sometimes people think that the tramp is in The Great Dictator, but in fact, in that film, the two characters he's playing, the Jewish barber has a name, and of course, the Hitler parallel, Adenoid Henkel, has a name. So this is also the last appearance of the tramp, and it is, I would say, it's certainly an interesting path that the Chaplin's on when he makes this film. You were mentioning, Riley, the Great Depression, and that was certainly a factor. It's interesting, too, that this film comes out in 1936. By 1936, sound had already been in film for close to 10 years, and he still stuck to his guns and decided to make a silent comedy, which I think is remarkable. And the fact that it becomes one of his most celebrated films at a time where every other silent comedian was completely out of the game, I think is a really impressive testament to his craft.
Yeah, this was kind of like let me put the nail in the coffin on silent film on my terms. That's my Chaplin impression.
Oh my God, it's almost like he's back from the dead.
Yeah. Guys, let me show you how it's done. All right.
Well, it's almost like this movie is in and of itself in real life, kind of like what the movie's saying. It's almost like, well, industrialization's here, and, well, silent movies are dead now, so I guess we gotta get our stuff and walk down the road and see what we can make out of things. And he didn't have the worst time after this, right? I mean, because The Great Dictator's after this.
Yeah, but then he was hunted by HUAC and exiled from the country for being a suspected communist.
That wasn't just specifically him. That was literally just the world ended for actors.
It's worth noting that the reason he was exiled is because Modern Times is the result of him becoming much more outspoken politically. The fact is, there was a great book, Riley, you mentioned Harpo Marx's biography. I just picked up and read for the first time a book that was only published 2 years ago based on articles he wrote in the 1930s, when Chaplin was releasing City Lights, which was his film before Modern Times. Even then, 1931, sound had already been around for 5 years. He was concerned that a silent movie wouldn't sell, so he embarked on a world tour to promote the movie. But while he was on the tour, which he chronicled in this book that is called A Comedian Sees the World, while he was on this tour, he saw firsthand the effects of global poverty and the effects of the Great Depression, and to put it in terms that we now use on social media, but he wouldn't have used at the time, he essentially became what you could call radicalized in that way. He started reading a lot of socialist philosophy and economic philosophy, Keynesian economics, and became very, very interested in that. And it was this tour, this particular tour, seeing England, France, and meeting with, while he was on this tour, he was so celebrated, he met with Mahatma Gandhi and Albert Einstein and all of these great figures while he was on this tour. That is what shaped the story that we have of modern times. He wasn't necessarily so politically inclined. Then he makes this film, which ended up causing him much distress later when the House of Un-American Activities Committee decided to paint it as an overtly communist film, which he maintained throughout his life. He didn't have a particular political alignment. He was just trying to appeal to the common man. And you can really see that in the book, where he's just traveling around and seeing the world and the state of it.
That's incredible. That's so cool.
Well, there's not, and I promise I will stop going on this Criterion essay in a moment.
That's incredible. That's so cool.
One of the things, you could watch Modern Times and just watch it from, an ahistorical perspective. There's also some interesting things where to me, watching it, it cannot be an accident that the film seems to lean so heavily into, and I promise I will get less, academic in a moment, but it leans so heavily into the Marx theory of alienation, which is Karl Marx's theory of alienation, the idea of that industrialism alienates the worker from the product, from the production aspect, and also alienates them from themselves. I mean, that moment, to get into the film specifically, the invention of the feeding machine isn't just a gag to make him look funny, but it's this idea of that the company, this industry, is so desperate to rob them of their humanity that it will not even allow them to eat or use the restroom without still working.
Sure. We see that a lot today. I'll take it a step further, because really close to the beginning of the film, when the little tramp is he's tightening those bolts on the assembly line, and you see him walk away from the assembly line, and he still has the tick, and he's still moving his arms like he's tightening the bolts. And it's just a very quick, very effective, very simple illustration that this work beats you down and controls you to such a degree that you can't stop when you're supposed to. And then he's trying to keep up, and people are chastising him for slowing down and arguing and everything like that. And he gets sucked inside the machine. The line that I wrote down was, he went inside the machine and came out different, because he goes through the gears, like one of the most iconic images of the movie, and then they reverse the machine and he gets sucked right back out, and he's full clown at that point. He's tightening everything. He's tightening people's hats and women's nipples, and just finding bolts everywhere. And I feel like that is just another effective comical metaphor for just being caught up in that labor system, that from just being in the factory in general, and his body moving a certain way, to being fully caught up in the literal machine, and then coming out not giving a fuck about anybody's humanity and just going for it, and then having to be put into a mental hospital.
Now, an interesting thing about that moment with the gears, I found this out through the Criterion Collection released the film, is that was actually supposed to be close to the end of the film when Chaplin originally shot it. His original plan for the film was actually a much sadder version of the story, where the tramp would work at the factory, he'd go on his adventure, but then he would go back to the factory, which is, the gear sequence would have been his second time there. That would have caused him to have a nervous breakdown. And then when he was in the hospital, the Paulette Goddard character was supposed to show up, but now she had become a nun, nursing him back to health and then sending him off on his way to walk down the road alone. But Chaplin changed his mind and decided to make it a more optimistic ending, which is why this is the first and only time that the tramp does not walk away alone at the end. He walks off with Paulette Goddard into the sunset, and the whole restaurant sequence, the whole singing thing, was a late addition to the film, which he actually lifted from an earlier film he had made called The Rink way back in 1916. But he felt that it needed a laugh at the end. It needed some optimism there.
Absolutely, yeah. Closing it out with some fireworks, a musical number, and then something to some kind of, though it's like it's optimistic by the end. It's simple, but it's just to keep going, to survive, to have a companion, that kind of thing. It's nice.
I'm glad you're on this because I think the thing that's fascinating about this film in particular, because people have complained about other Chaplin films, especially his later films, that become too, they call, the term was used at the time even of preachy. There was some maybe not great reception to the speech at the end of The Great Dictator that we now all recognize as great, but at the time, so people were, and then when you get to his later films, when he actually starts making sound films like Monsieur Vidot, ends with this giant, broad speech that it's an indictment of, well, you know, if the natural endpoint of diplomacy is war, then the natural endpoint of capitalism is murder, and this whole thing. And it's very, whereas this film strikes such a brilliant balance. And I was thinking about what you do with your show. You started doing a show on Planet Scum, the Twitch channel, the Chris Gethard Twitch channel, called Googy Morning. And once you were figuring out what the show was, and once there was this massive social upheaval in the country, you really made an effort to kind of put the show in a direction where you alternate seemingly every week between something that is fun and silly and then something that is kind of socially inclined. You know, one week you're doing juggling and the next week you're doing a book club on Our Prison's Obsolete or something like that. And I thought that was such an interesting parallel to the way that this film attempts to kind of cover both ground.
Yeah, you know, that originally emerged because Googy Morning at first intended to be the return of Vacation Jason, the character that I did on the Chris Gethard Show, and a character that brings me a lot of joy to play. It's, you know, it's brought me a lot of opportunity and crazy full circle mystical experiences have come out of just having fun playing that character. And it's also something that resonates with people. I've written a lot of jokes that I didn't think were going to work and people like it. So it's not often that, especially someone like me who, you know, I get self-conscious and neurotic about whatever my career might turn out to be as a comedian. When I stumble upon something like Vacation Jason, it feels so validating and it feels so strike while the iron's hot kind of thing, or like it's just something I can return to. It's something that's like a hit, you know? And I just realized, like, you know, as much as I like doing this character, I feel like I have to put it down again. Like I'll pick it up, make some music, put it down. And it's just, especially with the rebellions and the, you know, the upheaval and everything, it just, as much as I get spiritually out of being a clown, I don't know. It just, the character of just like, everything's cool, go on vacation, just didn't strike a chord that was sitting well with me. So yeah, the show's kind of become an exercise for me in like trying to be a little bit more myself, vulnerable from time to time, while also unpacking some of the things that creatively turn me on in terms of like how I got to a point where I could do Vacation Jason or Klon. So I'll, you know, teach juggling like I used to at the summer camp I used to work at, or I'll, you know, host a music open mic for stupid songs that people just want to throw out there. And then, I don't know, just trying to think of a way to be a little bit more, I don't want to say like responsible, but I just like find a way to inspire growth in oneself, and also to kind of hold myself accountable to actively participating in my own growth. Yeah, there's kind of a book club now. I'm thinking of reducing the frequency of the book club episodes, just so everyone can catch up and won't have to go at such a fever pitch to read. But it's been nice to kind of let my mind wander after reading some thought-provoking stuff. And surprisingly, people seem to be receptive to, I call it left brain episodes and right brain episodes, and people seem to enjoy both. So that's what I'm doing right now.
And that kind of ties into, you know, what I was talking about before with the kind of the journey that Chaplin was forced to take, not just from a socio-political perspective, but also from an artistic perspective. I mean, we started this out talking about how this is one of the last silent films, but it's not technically a silent film, and he didn't call it a silent film. It was a dialogueless film. But sound is in fact very important to this and deliberate. He wrote the film. He wrote a full script with dialogue for this film. And after shooting about a scene or two, he chucked it out. But he did have mics on set for this, and the choice of, the use of sound is not just an add-on. He was very deliberate about the score, and there are audio gags in this film. I mean, this is, I'm not going to pretend to be a historian. I could be completely wrong, but this has got to be one of the first flatulence jokes in cinema. The bit with him and the woman with the tea and the stomach gurgling.
I loved it.
I think it has to be. There's a lot of, I hate to use the word raunchy, but there is a surprising amount of boundary pushing in this, that there's, people think of silent films as very stodgy and very stiff, but you mentioned, Chaplin trying to tighten the woman's nipples. You've got a gas joke, and you've also got a prolonged cocaine joke in this film.
Yeah, a really long cocaine joke.
Yeah. But it's interesting to watch him kind of evolve that way, the way you were talking about trying to figure out. I think you can see him trying to figure out, how does humor work in these, to use the title, modern times.
Yeah, where does the absurdity lie?
And it's the fact that he uses the humor to point out real issues. I think one thing I want to touch on is there's the great sequence where he is just trying to flag somebody down, but ends up getting swept up in a communist demonstration. And then in a scene that is still kind of jarring, when the police show up, they violently break up the strike, which was so common in those times.
Yeah.
And definitely feels, finger on the pulse even now, which is so impressive almost 100 years later.
Yeah, I was watching that going, damn. I mean, we have the Black Lives Matter protest, and they're still going on. But I was like, damn, where's the unionizing protests? I mean, let's prioritize. But also, I was just impressed to know that that's what a pro-labor protest could look like.
Well, it was also such an interesting time. I like to point out to people when they talk about, when you look at the blacklist and you look at HUAC, and how many people were brought before and are you a member of the Communist Party? It was a very different thing in the 1920s and the 1930s, not just to be intrigued by things like socialism. And this is not going to get into contemporary politics, but at the time it was a very different thing, a different attitude. I mean, obviously it was more accessible insofar as, not to be crass, but you do always feel like any kind of post-Trotsky Stalinist writing has this tone of, no, but I promise this time it'll work. Whereas there was a lot more optimism in the 20s and 30s, not to mention, as Chaplin himself pointed out when the US government was trying to call him in to name names, he said, look, yes, I was out making these pro-Russia speeches, but I was only doing it because the US government said, go out and make these pro-Russia speeches so that we can open a second Eastern Front in the war.
Wow.
Like they were, the Soviet Union were our allies in the 40s. And this is kind of, it was interesting, I suppose, in a way, to look at the way that Chaplin viewed it, which is he often stated he was a citizen of the world, and he was just open to other viewpoints. I will get off the track of his European adventure, but I do love the fact that in 1931, he's traveling Europe and he meets with Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi asked to meet with him, which Gandhi had just gotten out of prison at this point. Chaplin's been called luminous, but he met with Gandhi. And when he sat down with Gandhi, Chaplin said to him, and I have the quote here, I should like to know why you're opposed to machinery. After all, it's the natural outcome of man's genius and is part of his evolutionary progress. It is here to free him from the bondage of slavery, to help him to leisure and a higher culture. So that was the view that Chaplin had in 1931. And then after his conversation with Gandhi, where Gandhi kind of expressed that no, machinery and industrialism is being used by the British to enslave the Indians. We don't need that. It's interesting that 5 years later, he makes Modern Times, a film that is very much not reflective of the viewpoint he's expressing in that quote. It's very much the opposite.
That's cool.
So it is interesting to watch his views evolve. Now, Tom, was this your first time seeing this?
Oh, no. I saw this in college, but, it's one of those things where so much time had passed that I honestly forgot it was feature length. I thought it was one of his shorts because all I could remember was the stuff in the factory, the iconic scene of him going into the gears and everything. So it was pretty much like watching it anew for the first time. It is wild how much of what he was going for in his dissection of modern living with factories and where work has to define who you are. It's still issues today. If anything, it felt like it kind of dipped a bit, and now it's back full force where Amazon factories are making people work so hard they have to pee in bags at their stations. But when this pandemic started, and before the Black Lives Matter protest started, Amazon workers were trying to unionize, and they started just breaking they were breaking it up. It really was wild watching this and being like, Jesus Christ, none of this really has changed, and it seems like we're a good chunk of this country is trying to force us back into that life of if you don't have a job that you don't work 6 days a week, 80 hours a week or whatever the hell, you're kind of worthless. And I also just something that really took me by surprise was how he gets into almost like how it's a thing that poor people will actually prefer to just go to jail instead of having to deal with living in the world where they can't get by. It's like, I got a place to sleep, I got food, it's fine. Kind of took me by surprise.
The idea of food and the idea of hunger is so prevalent in this film. I mean, obviously there's the whole portion of the film where he is working at the store. One of which I thought was a fun little in-joke is that when he and the woman go into the department store, which is Paula Goddard, who was his wife at the time. When they run to the department store, she runs over to all the toys. The first toy she picks up is a Mickey Mouse doll, which is Chaplin making an inside joke about the fact that, in the 20s, his rivals on screen, and the 10s and 20s, his rivals on screen are Buster Keaton and Fatty Arbuckle and all that. And by the 30s, so many of those silent comedians got out. His biggest comedic rival was this cartoon mouse. And of course, you have the great roller skating sequence where it looks like he's going to fall off the ledge, which is itself a camera trick. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but he did a glass painting that's gone around on Twitter a lot, to show the edge. But I think what's most interesting in that sequence is that when he originally wrote the scene, the guys who were robbing the store, you actually saw them taking things of silver, but then he recognized later that would make them criminals in the audience's eyes, and he wanted to show the audience that if somebody is resorting to theft, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are a criminal. So he has them instead just say, we're only hungry. And Chaplin, who grew up poor, understands that hunger is crucial, is a crucial motivating factor.
Chaplin's a very warm-hearted guy. He puts the tramp through a lot of abuse, but at the end of the day, there's a sense of warmth and understanding to Chaplin's filmmaking that, I think is very refreshing these days, Especially we got so many complaints that you can't be funny anymore unless you're like making fun of minorities or gays or whatever. It's just like, no, you could be funny. His stuff's been funny for like 80 years, 100 years at this point, and he ain't punching down. If anything, all of his work is punching up. I mean, The few stuff I've seen of his, I haven't completed his filmography, but he's very much like, no, for people on the bottom rung of society, the cops are bad. I mean, he's ACAB, it's because in this, and then, like I saw The Kid like a month ago, and, it's very much like, oh, the cops are here. This is not good for me because they're going to make my life worse. They don't understand because they're a part of the system.
I want to get on another topic, which is Riley, because you're also, in addition to being a comedian, a very physical comedian and a clown, as you say, you're also a musician. You play music, you like creating music, and Chaplin was very heavily involved in the score of this film. So I wanted to know from your perspective what you thought of the way that he composed a score for this film.
I was surprised. I didn't know that. I learned just in the opening credits that Chaplin composed his own scores. And I made a short maybe a month ago, and part of it has like a kind of a cliche silent movie moment. And I just went and found some royalty-free silent movie music. And it's just that old, piano sound, like from like a, kind of evokes like twirling mustache, tire to the railroad tracks kind of sound. And I was surprised and delighted to know that like this was a full-on, almost orchestral composition. And it had variety, and it had themes. It had, there was the song at the end. It was intricate, and it was engaging. It wasn't just something that filled space.
And most interestingly, this score features the song that would become most associated with Chaplin, because this is where he wrote the music that would become the song "Smile." You can hear it throughout the score. That's na 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 na.
Mm-hmm.
And about 20 years later, Chaplin is at this point practically chased out of the country by the McCarthyites. And some lyricists came along, wrote the lyrics to Smile. Jimmy Durante covers it, it becomes a hit. Nat King Cole covers it, it becomes a hit. Michael Jackson covers it. And then, sure enough, last year it shows up in Joker. It's this weird secondary legacy that Chaplin has musically.
Isn't this the movie they're watching at the museum at
Yes.
the Joker? Yeah, I knew it was a Chaplin thing. I forgot if it was Modern Times.
Yeah, Modern Times is the film that is used, because I think it's also trying to invoke this idea. What The Little Tramp was so popular for is that he was this archetype that I don't know if we have culturally anymore, which was this idea that he was a Job-like character. He was a poor person who always got knocked down. He got back up again, but you knew that, the movie was always going to leave him in the same spot he was. That even if he inherits millions, he'll lose it by the end of the picture. Whether it's City Lights or Gold Rush, you kind of always leave the little tramp walking off into the sunset, and people showed up for that. And I think that there was, I don't know how to describe it, because you could, it could be argued that there was a real empathy for the underprivileged that the tramp represents, but it also seems like a lot of the people who went to see it were equally underprivileged to a degree and going, yeah, that's how life is. I do want to also make an observation that Paulette Goddard, one of my favorite moments in the film that doesn't necessarily land anymore because we don't have that reference base, is the first time we're introduced to Paulette Goddard, who's called the gamine in this film. She's stealing food and giving it to kids in a very Robin Hood way, but he gives her a knife in her mouth that she's posed just like the Black Pirate, the Douglas Fairbanks character. And he's kind of trying to draw a line between, well, if you're going to cheer on the pirates who are stealing things just to steal things, you have to cheer on the people who are stealing things to feed people, which I think is interesting.
That's cool. I didn't catch that.
Seems like a lot of decisions were made. Everything you're looking at is meant to really get to what he's trying to say about, living life at the bottom rung of society, So little things like that, may not translate 80 years later or whatever, we don't have Douglas Fairbanks references being tossed off these days on TikTok anymore. But,
Those were the days, yeah.
Those were the days, but Douglas Fairbanks was everywhere. My heart would swoon. But yeah, I mean, it just goes to show that as on a macro level, things work today. But then you dig deeper and you go, oh, even on the micro, things we're not really able to really notice unless we dive deep into it, is informing what we're watching. So even subconsciously, like, that's a smart decision. I don't know why, but that's good.
And I think it's interesting, and Riley, if you could speak to this a little bit, that, I mean, you are a comedian who, in your 3 Clown specials you did not give the character any real words to say until the 3rd installment, and you're a very physical performer yourself. And then Tom mentioned TikTok jokingly, but you're seeing this rise of young comedians who are either doing lip sync videos like Sarah Cooper or Maria Ducotis, and so many young people who are doing these short form, if not silent, ostensibly dialogueless pieces. So from somebody who is a comedian and somebody who is as you put it, a clown, how do you see that? Do you see that shift back toward a more physical kind of humor?
Well, it's attention grabbing, especially when you're scrolling fast. It's like changing channels on a TV, but you could do it 200 times a minute, if you really wanted to, and you're just scrolling, and every video is muted. So you really got to do something dynamic and visually captivating to even get someone to stop and, unmute and pay attention long enough. So yeah, it's just such a primal form of performance and expression that it makes sense to me that, like, the channels that we are now afforded to express ourselves on the internet have been so pared down that what we kind of have to act like parents of newborns to kind of catch your eye, jingle some keys or make a big face or show a boob or something, to like get this baby's attention. And the baby is, every mindless scroller. That's one aspect of it. And then the other aspect, I think, is that there's, whether it's like slapstick or dance or a combination of the two, or, just something a little bit more slice of life, or if you're just, happen to be odd looking or attractive in some way. I don't know. There's like empathy in the visual. You either see yourself in what you're seeing, or you see yourself interacting with what you're seeing. That's the great trick and the great secret to a lot of the physical performance that I quote unquote trained in, whether it's something as simple as like doing object work, miming in an improv scene, opening a cabinet or pouring a glass of water. It's just you want to make it realistic because people have seen that, and it puts you at ease to see something mimed accurately. It really helps you get immersed in the scene. Or whether it's something like a parody of professional wrestling, all the little conventions of a professional wrestling match help tell the story and just get the audience not to think about the fact that these are goofballs wearing Halloween costumes, doing fake punches and kicks, but like there's a story being told. Or the theatrical clowning training that is so emphatic on making direct eye contact with the audience and reacting so genuinely and attentively to a laugh or a movement or just a noise that an audience member is making. And it's all, it's all about eliminating entirely that fourth wall. Same with the comedy pro wrestling thing, where you are presenting so largely, so conspicuously to your audience that it's kind of about bringing them in. So when I see like, the rise of, I guess it's another rise, but like, the same way Vine and TikTok kind of have these dance crazes, or these physical comedians, or like pranks. It's like, let me engage you like with something visceral. It's not just, it can be witty and it can be wordy and it can be a combination of a lot of things, but to grab someone's attention and make them feel something, physicality and visuals are just tough to beat. I mean, why is Disney so evocative and effective after, close to 100 years? It's because they're like basically, genius scientists in terms of like, how do we access the child's mind, whether it's an actual child or the child of an adult, the child mind inside an adult mind, and it has all these little tricks of just like the eyes have to be a certain proportion to the size of the head, and everything has to kind of flow in this animation style that just makes you really, it just hits you somewhere that is kind of more intricate than I think people want to give it credit.
I think that's interesting, and I wanna read one of Chaplin's quotes from A Comedian Sees the World and get your response to it, because what's fascinating about particularly that collection is Chaplin was a talented writer and essayist in a way. I mean, he notes in here that he's sitting down with Lady Astor and the German members of the Reichstag 2 years before Hitler becomes chancellor, and he's making these passionate arguments in favor of eliminating the gold standard and providing a living wage for people in England. So he's very verbose in that way, and yet when they asked him about speaking in film, which you would think he would want to do when he's making these impassioned pleas, the quote he gave was, "For years, I have specialized in one type of comedy, strictly pantomime. I have measured it, gauged it, studied. I have been able to establish exact principles to govern its reaction on audiences. It has a certain pace and tempo. Dialogue, to my way of thinking, always slows action because action must wait on words." So I wanted to know from somebody who went from a character that, when you were doing, say, Vacation Jason on Chris Gethard Show, that was a lot of improvised dialogue, a lot of speaking, to a wordless character. I wanted to know what you thought of that idea of action must wait on words.
I wanted to do something that felt different with Klon. CGP, Chris Gethard Presents, was like, I wanted to make sure that I was doing the first show on CGP that wasn't like a talk show format. All the brilliant stand-up comedians and improvisers that come through, it's just comedy has gotten so wordy at least, like mainstream comedy, whether it's all the political talk shows or stand-up specials, just everything is so wordy. Even the wordiness of Vacation Jason, which I have a lot of fun with, puns and just little plays on words, and the tropes of like surfer dude stuff is so fun. But like I always prided myself on like the character works, I think mostly because you look at this guy and it's like, okay, you get it. I don't really like, you hear the name, you see the colors I'm wearing, you see the goop on my nose, and it's like, you understand right away. And so I think in an effort to just kind of tip the scales in my favor, it helps to work visually. I think visually often when I think of something that makes me laugh, it's usually like an image in my mind rather than like a funny written out turn of phrase or a concept. And I just think when I have the opportunity to do a public access television show, and I already have these kind of reservations about how smart or dumb I am, and the ideas I want to get across, let's blow this out visually. Let's blow this out conceptually. I wasn't then, and I'm not now, like in like the headspace where I feel primed to deliver like a confessional or some kind of like riff on the state of the world or like who I am as a performer. But like I feel like if I could get visual and a little bit physical and stupid with it, for lack of a better word, like I feel like that was just a more pure representation of what I like to do.
I think it's interesting that if you look at particularly what you're doing with Klon, you were satirizing particular industrialists, whether it was with the Brian Fungalhead character was kind of, at least felt very similar to what a lot of those tech moguls you had, and you brought in a character, at least in the first two installments, who was almost a Susie Orman business TV type. Whereas when you look at Modern Times, what Chaplin was doing there, in perhaps a throw to what his next film would be and how direct its satire would be, the factory head, who we see not just in his office but projected on the screens in a proto 1984 way, because that was obviously not a thing yet, that image of the giant face on the screen, but he brings us that, is modeled after Henry Ford, because in the 20s Chaplin actually got to tour one of Henry Ford's factories, and while he was impressed by the technical marvels of it, especially after his tour for City Lights, he recognized just how dehumanizing it was. And I think a great example of that in this film is when, in the Return to the Factory, when his coworker is trapped in the gears and Chaplin is feeding his coworker, his trapped coworker, and we watch as he uses a chicken as a coffee funnel, and he's asking in a way for empathy from the audience. He's asking the audience to actually favor his, albeit goofy, ingenuity over the kind of regularity and rigidness of machinery. And I was thinking about how that reflects even what you did in Klon, in a way that those three shorts are rooted in empathy in a lot of ways. It is asking the audience, especially when the character is alone on stage, asking the audience to connect to this character and find empathy in this character, who we have been told repeatedly is a machine, and who we are asked to, who we are told to ask to perform tasks. And yet, when it comes to that character alone, you're armed with only the ability to smile and wave, and you're asking the audience to connect with that character.
Well, yeah, there's a couple things there. The chicken as the funnel in Modern Times, that's just like pure clown innovation. A clown is gonna imagine some dumb thing working and just try it. And the best clowns, and they do it with full confidence. Him speaking or singing in gibberish, not knowing the words. That's what clowns do. They're just going to hop into a situation and go, no, I'm an expert here. I got this. And we got to practice like an improvised version of that in Klon, where like just callers would call up and say, hey, can he do a headstand? And No, I can't do a headstand, but can Klon do a headstand? Let's find out. The innovation thing where I was, there was a great touring clown show. I saw it on Broadway at the beginning of the year. It's called Slava's Snow Show. I'm looking at the playbill right now. It's one of the maybe the most inspiring live shows I've ever seen. But look up. There's like a documentary that National Geographic did. It's about a 30-minute documentary on YouTube about Slava, Slava. But anyway, there's a scene in this clown show where it's the sound, it's the torrential rain and the sound of the waves of the ocean and all this fog and these bright blue lights, and this bed frame gets pushed onto the stage, and it's got a broomstick and a big sheet as a sail, and they're right in front of you, they're making you believe that this bed frame and this pole and this sheet are a ship sailing, and they get thrown overboard and they're swimming back onto the boat. And I don't know, I guess just I know there's an example somewhere in Klon of just like all those little solo moments where Brian Fungalhead leaves the stage and Klon imagines that he's in a restaurant being served by a human, or he's he's having a drink in a honky tonk with a drunk baby. It's just it's just, we all know this is a mostly bare stage here, and this is just a public access studio, but we're going to just through confidence, goofy innovation and imagination, just kind of, and empathy, make you believe something for a minute.
And that's also, you mentioned that being able to make something out of very little, that's a real testament to Chaplin and what kind of, I think, separates him from some of the other silent acts of the time. And I don't mean to sound negative on them, but, Buster Keaton was known as a stone face. And Harold Lloyd, when we think of Harold Lloyd, he's hanging from the clock. And Chaplin could do so much with so little, even though he builds this grandiose forced perspective factory that feels like it fell right out of Fritz Lang's Metropolis. Some of the best known Chaplin gags are just him doing little physical, exactly, the potatoes on the forks and the gold rush. Even watching him do the roller skating gag in the in the department store. Yes, you have the joke of the ledge there, but that's forced perspective. It's mostly just watching this silly physicality. You mentioned the song. I mean, he's mostly just standing still and doing arm motions, but that bit lands, and he doesn't need any kind of set for that. He doesn't need anything. He's just doing a bit, doing little backslides with his foot, doing a song that I couldn't help, and I don't know how you feel about this, Tom, but to me, all I could think of with that song is Nino Rota's score for the end of Fellini's 8.5. Now, Fellini was a huge clown fan and a big physical comedy fan, so I cannot imagine that that's a coincidence, that end song that plays in 8.5 when all of Guido's friends and ex-lovers are coming by and dancing, it felt so similar.
Those Italians back in the day when Fellini and them were making movies, they came up watching this stuff, so I'd have to say 100% he was definitely thinking of this movie when he was doing that.
This is one of those ones, when we do this show, and I'll say this, Riley, because we've done a couple of these episodes now, we're always trying to figure out and get to the heart of help people understand why these films still matter. And sometimes, you look at a film and you really have to make a case for, like, oh, well, but if you look at this, you can see how it influences. But with this, I think you see the influence of not just Chaplin, but this film in particular, so much in so many ways that, I mean, it's so, I wrote my notes that this movie is the bridge between Fritz Lang's Metropolis and then later Jacques Tati's entire filmography, but particularly Playtime. And you also see it, I mean, Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir named their publication, I'm going to mispronounce it, but Le Temps Moderne, after Modern Times. Like it had an influence not just in comedy circles, but in what we'd call social justice circles now. I think this is one of those ones where you clearly see, and I'm not sure if you can think of any examples yourself, but there's so many influences, even if they come around and be something where I think that one of your films or one of your works is influenced by it, and it's not necessarily directly, but there is certainly a similar DNA.
Well, yeah, it's just, again, like I'm woefully ignorant, almost willfully ignorant, because I get self-conscious about, like specific influential works, especially like when I'm in the middle of like trying to craft my thing. Even not having the specific beats of the scenes to draw from, even just knowing that I can combine very basic clowning technique with some kind of social commentary about how absurd the working world is, how absurd the industrial world is, like the advertising world, all of that. I just know that I just almost instinctually knew that was possible. And I knew that I was putting my spin on it, but not innovating. I just knew that, I mean, like if I could, I'll go out on a limb and say Klon very, in a small way, is kind of in that traditional lineage of just like physical performance illustrating the absurdity in modern times. How about that?
Now, real quick, because I know you got to go. Do you have any other observations you want to make before we wrap up?
I just think don't underestimate clowns. You know, like it's such a potent symbol. You know, it's so ubiquitous that people will go like, clowns, right? It's okay. Like that's everyone's. That's the passerby's instinct is to dismiss the clown or to ridicule a clown. That's that's what it's there for. But there's a lot of layers to it. There's a lot of intricacies to it, and it's the clown that'll catch you off guard and make you pay closer attention to life. Like I think cool comedians and people who cross their arms will just out of instinct want to refuse the opportunity to be entertained by a clown. But I don't know, it's just such, you give it a chance and you end up seeing and hearing something pretty powerful. Whether it's Chaplin, everyone knows what the hat and the cane and the mustache look like, and it's easy to go like, well, how is that the most influential guy in cinema? But you just watch it and you just see the roots sprouting out from everywhere. Groucho glasses, everyone puts on Groucho glasses and it's hack, or honks a horn and it's hack. But it's like there's a reason why it works, and it's because it's funny, and it's because it grabs your attention, and it's also because they were intelligent about it. They were masters of a craft. They were very disciplined about it. Pee Wee Herman, I don't know. I'm jumping around now. Jim Carrey, they it's easy to be a class clown, I guess, and just be goofy. But like when you really inspect the artistry behind these guys, like it goes deep. I don't know. I'm a fan, trying to be a student when I can afford it, and when there isn't a pandemic keeping me inside. But it unlocks something pretty special and unique in my heart to be a little sappy about it. And I'm so grateful that I was given an opportunity to do that on a platform where like I now have these YouTube specials that I can just save and send to people, and just I feel like I have proof that type of stuff works if you put the work in. And I don't know, I would love to get the chance to do that kind of stuff again, because it's a different kind of feeling from just trying to be witty and clever. And there is wit and cleverness in there, but like the extra sauce of trying to be innovative, trying to be empathetic, I feel like is necessary and is lacking in a lot of what I see.
Shortly, roughly, maybe a week after we decided we were doing this show, I knew you were the person I wanted to come on for this film in particular, and I'm so glad that you agreed to come on, and I'm so glad that we got you to see this film, which is such a staple.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to get to work. A great dictator. Let's go.
Thank you so much for joining us, Riley. I really appreciate it. And I'm so glad to have you on. Folks can check out Googy Morning every Saturday morning at 11 on Planet Scum Live. And do you have any socials you want to plug? Anything else you want to?
Yeah, follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Riley Soloner. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Just I don't know. I don't post that often. It's fine. Maybe I'll do a TikTok now.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Charlie.
Something I've always found fascinating with Chaplin, and particularly modern times, is I think it's something that, regardless of what sort of preconceived notion or judgment you may have on film, Chaplin seems to just be timeless. I mean, it's not something that someone watches and go, okay, like I don't understand the big deal. Like there's some inherent value in it, regardless of your background.
I have always found it very frustrating, and Tom can attest, like, we knew people like that even in film school who very much had this attitude of, like, I find silent movies boring. I don't watch silent movies because they're boring and old, and they seem to treat it as though all movies were crap until sound came along. And I think that you're right. There is something timeless about Chaplin, and particularly with this film, it's about how he understands. He can use sound. We watch him use sound a lot, whether it's the corn rotating or the flatulence, but he's not using it as a crutch. He's using it as a way to accentuate the comedy that he already knows. And I think that to invoke our title, people who have that kind of attitude toward silent films genuinely are missing out when it comes to particularly the silence of Keaton or Chaplin or some of those.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is some of the easiest cinema you could watch. There's not much. There's no barrier that you have to really know. Like, you don't have to know everything about life in the 30s or the 20s or whichever Chaplin movie you're watching. You could kind of just have a broad sense of understanding of where this is coming from, and then just watch these masterfully crafted set pieces of physical comedy. I mean, it's stuff that went through the Three Stooges, the Looney Tunes. I mean, it's not hard, and it really is just a sense of stubborn. There's a stubborn quality to people that won't watch it, because this is easier than even a lot of movies made today, to be honest, of just, oh, Jesus Christ, this is going to take forever, where you watch Chaplin thing and you go, oh, this is like, felt like it could have been made yesterday if there's nothing to it. As much as complicated as it is, it's also, there's not much to it that's keeping me at arm's length.
But I agree. There's something to it that is very, and not just timeless because, oh, it's so well made or anything, but because physical humor. And this is something that I was very happy to have Riley on, because Riley touched on that as well. I mean, the idea of the clown has endured because it is something that can play to any audience, and admittedly, there are certain things that a contemporary audience, maybe in the most traditional sense of how we understand a clown in the very bright colored costumes and all that, maybe some of those things don't resonate with contemporary audiences, but the physicality still lands. Physical humor still plays quite well. I mean, you see it in the descendants like, Jacques Tati, if you watch Mr. Hewlett's Holiday or Monsieur Hewlett's Holiday or Playtime, or you look at another example, of course, Mr. Bean. These bits still work. And the thing is, they don't need subtitles. They don't need translating. They play. Look at what I was saying. When you look at Comedian Sees the World, which is, I highly recommend to anybody, great book, Comedian Sees the World, that was edited by Lisa Steinhaven. Just want to give credit there. Comedian Sees the World. I mean, Chaplin was adored by everyone from Albert Einstein to Mahatma Gandhi, and they all watched his films and laughed, and those are people you don't necessarily picture going to see what was treated as a goofy comedy at the time.
As always, what film would you want to add to the registry?
Okay, so I was thinking about, what to add to the registry. Obviously, again, the parameters, it's not already there, and it's at least 10 years old. I was thinking about, there is a short film, because one of the things I love about the National Film Registry is it's not just features, it's shorts, it's cartoons, it's serials. There's a short film from 1988 called Technological Threat. It's an animated short. It was produced by Bill Croyer, and the film depicts an office full of what look like Tex Avery-esque cartoon wolves. And when a worker in that office becomes exhausted and can't complete their work, the boss, played by Bulldog, presses a button and drops them down a trapdoor, and they're replaced by a robot. And the film depicts this one wolf worker valiantly trying to stave off the encroaching technological threat and not be replaced by machines. But why I think this film is so fascinating, and what made me think of modern times, is not just the use of machinery, but the fact that the film is a meta-commentary on animation, because the wolf workers that you see in the film are all hand-drawn, but the robots were created using computer-generated 3D models. So it is a film from 1988 that is very accurately predicting the encroaching obsolescence of hand-drawn animation in the face of computer animation, which now, I mean, you don't see hand-drawn films really ever. And if you do, they're mostly foreign imports from G-Kids, and even Disney is almost entirely CGI now. So Technological Threat in 88 is already predicting that that's what's going to happen. Now, interestingly enough, Technological Threat was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Animated Short, but it lost to Pixar's landmark CGI short Tin Toy, the first fully CGI animated film from Pixar. So it kind of predicted its own loss, as well as the animation industry's loss. So I think for what it represents, particularly if you look at the things that the registry has put in, like the old mill and a computer animated hand and some of these shorts and the advances they show, I think the Technological Threat very much lines up with the ideas of modern times and very much earns its place in the registry.
Since we got to stick with America, that means I can't put up any Jackie Chan flicks because, well, that's pretty obvious, and I'm sure shit not putting up Rush Hour. Although I could be meta about it and do Shanghai Nights, which has Charlie Chaplin as a character in it.
But then you're arguing that Shanghai Nights should be in the National Film Registry.
I don't know. I mean, have you seen Shanghai Nights? It's a toss-up. I wanted to go a little sideways and not go for something that's about the physicality or the comedy or anything. And I wanted to go for the themes he's working with about the life on the working class, living poor, having to throw your life into work and all of that, and how dehumanizing it can be, and how money turns people against, each other and all that, and how just life for those at the bottom rung of the ladder is not easy and is kind of made to not be easy. And this is a movie I had watched recently. It was released it got a great Criterion release, made by one of the great unsung masters of cinema, John Sayles. I'm going to put up Matewan, his 1987 movie about a union uprising and a union war that broke out in the early 1900s. I just think it's one of the most well-observed, well-written, as is usual with John Sayles, well-directed, just emotional and very intelligent look at modern living in a world that is built around work, and how the poor have to work, and your life is based around work, and you can't just all these things that I feel like Chaplin was getting at comedically in this movie is something that Sayles, 50 years later, took very seriously. And movie that knocked me out when I saw it recently. And Matewan should be in the National Film Registry because Sayles is the man.
I haven't seen it, but I'm excited to, and that I know is like an early Chris Cooper film too, right?
Yeah, Cooper was one of his guys, and it's one of his early ones. Yeah, it was almost kind of a toss-up between that or another Sayles movie, 8 Men Out, which is tackling the same shit but from a different angle. And Matewan's the one that I think needs to be in over 8 Men Out. I think Matewan's a pretty stunning achievement in my mind.
Fantastic. And, hang on to that, because if you've got union stuff to talk about, next season we do Harlan County, USA. So we're gonna be. And we got Grapes of Wrath this season too. We're gonna be circling the labor issues for a while here on the waterfront. We're gonna be down this rabbit hole for a while.
Thank you for listening, and thanks to Riley Soloner for joining us. You can watch his show, Googy Morning, every Saturday at 11 a.m. on Planet Scum Live on Twitch. Follow him on social media at Riley Soloner. You can also follow our co-hosts on social media as well. You can find Mike at NKOAS and Tom at Raging Bull 1990. While you're there, be sure to follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at YMO Podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. It really helps a little show like ours. If you know some friends who might like the show, tell them about it. And if you know someone who might make a great guest for an upcoming film, tell us about it at yourmissingoutpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.